Hi there, my name is Scott Larson. I am the writer-artist of the creator-owned series Visitations. Visitations is the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes of the residents of the city's oldest cemetery. And one of the things that I've decided to do during this time that people are kind of locked up in their houses during the pandemic is to make sure that people who want to enter the comic book business kind of see what it was like for other creators. I've been doing comic books professionally for about 15 years. And there are different steps that I took from learning how to draw to my name is Scott Larson. I am the writer-artist of the creator-owned series Visitations. Visitations is the history of Chicago as seen through the eyes. Shoot, sorry, I have technical difficulties here. Hold on one second, please. Sorry about that. So anyway, there were different steps I took from the beginning of learning how to draw to my first assignment to deciding to create my own comic book. And so the people who I'm talking to have had different experiences along those lines as well. And the person who I'm interviewing today is a writer named Erica Schultz. And Erica Schultz is, her work is really interesting. I actually encountered Erica when I was going through some of the different stages, and we ended up doing work for the same company at the same time. And I was doing work for a company called Blue Water at the time, which changed their names many, many times since then. And Erica was also doing some writing for them. And one of the things that happened while she was doing the writing was we got in touch with each other, and I got to see some of her scripts. And her scripts, we talked about actually initially me illustrating one of the stories that she was doing. And the script that she did, it was for a book called Judo Girl. It was one of the best things I ever read. It was, the characters were great. It was smart writing. It was funny stuff. And I've been following Erica's career through the years, and she's done all kinds of stuff. She actually started out in the business by creating her own comic book. Her background is in advertising, which mine is as well, which I found interesting. We were both working for illustration studios at the same time. But she created a comic book called M3, and then she's done all kinds of things since then. She's done stuff for Dynamite. She's done stuff for Marvel. She participated in a DC Comics workshop. And in 2018, she wrote the Daredevil annual for Marvel. And I've known Erica for years, but I never got a chance to meet her until about a year ago when I saw her at C2E2. And I picked up the 2018 Daredevil annual from her. And it was one of the more recent comics that I read that I actually remember what happened in. And that's something that happens when you're in the business, is you tend to forget what happens from issue to issue. But that particular book was great. And it really brought back memories of the scripts that I had read from her years before. And it was smart, it was funny, it was really, really, really great. And Erica is one of my favorite writers. And so I'm going to bring her on now. And she can tell you more about herself. Come on. She can tell you some more about her stuff and her career, and we'll talk about some of the steps she took. Hi, Erica. How are you?
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing good. So I wanted to talk a little bit about where you started, because when we, well, before that, before I want to get into that, I'm interested in what your interest in comics was. What was the first thing you saw, and was it an actual comic book or was it something else?
I've always been interested and drawn to visual storytelling, whether it was comics or film or television. And my mom had done some freelance illustration when I was a kid. So art and sort of creating and things like that, that was always sort of something that was part of me in my DNA. In terms of what the first comic I ever read was probably either a Claremont X-Men or like a Jim Aparo Batman. My brother would read a lot of X-Men, Batman, Spider-Man in the 80s. And that's, you know, that was my mostly my exposure because it was in the house. But I always enjoyed visual storytelling. I always enjoyed just these fantastical ideas of people with, you know, abilities different from our own. And my first job out of college was working at an ad agency, and I was working as a copywriter, art director, assistant. And I ended up doing some art direction on some pretty popular ads at the time. And the way I really got started was I was working at a studio, like you were saying. I was working in an art studio in New York City, and I was doing Photoshop art and backgrounds and inking and really very much on the art side. I was doing some animation as well. And I'm a serviceable artist, but I'm not a good artist. And I don't like to do things unless they're going to be impeccable. And writing is always something that I really liked and appreciated. So we were working at the studio, we were working on a comic, and I started being exposed to how scripts were laid out, pacing and things like that through the studio. So I decided I was going to start writing my own scripts. I had written multiple stories that I didn't really know where they fit. It was just sort of a story idea or a short story or whatever. When I had been recuperating from a car accident. So I just sort of thought, okay, well, I have this story about this character M3. Why don't I see if I can, just as an exercise, see if I could make it a comic script. And I did, and I worked on that for, we ended up doing, Vicente Alcazar, who's the artist on M3, we ended up doing 12 issues over a course of about 3.5, 4 years. Because we were both sort of working on other things as we were going along. But I mean, it was an interesting exercise because I was learning as I was going. And it's not the best thing ever written out there, but there's something that you can appreciate about its rawness, for lack of a better term. Like I always say, like, I didn't know the rules, so I didn't know if I was breaking any of them. And there's a freedom to that. So, I mean, I've written other stories since then that I would consider technically, like, really like impeccable in terms of, like, you know, technique and pacing and this, that, and the next thing. And I mean, you could even say that they're almost formulaic. But I always loved M3, not just for the reason that it was, you know, sort of my first really jump in with 2 feet, but also because there was a freedom. There was this idea of, well, if it doesn't become anything, it doesn't become anything. You know, there were no stakes really involved for me. It was more or less, you know, do it if you like it. And it turned out that this was really what I loved to do and what I really wanted to continue doing.
So I want to ask a couple more questions about that. So M3, did you start out with a publisher or did you self-publish?
When we first started out, Vicente had drawn the first issue. I had lettered the first issue, and we submitted it to multiple publishers. Some publishers responded with a rejection letter. Some publishers didn't respond at all. And it got to the point where we were talking to colleagues and friends, and we had heard enough from them saying, this is a viable story. So we said, all right, well, we're going to do it ourselves. And we did, and we self-published, and we used an online printer, and we started, I started contacting comic shops in, you know, in the, I'm in Jersey and New York, so contacting comic shops in the area, see if they would carry it. And then after we hit issue number 4, a small publisher came in and wanted to publish the book. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. And then when we got to issue number 6, we were able to make a trade paperback. And when we had the trade paperback, Diamond Distributors approached us at New York Comic Con in, I want to say 2012. And they said, we'd like to carry this in our catalog. So the first trade paperback went into the catalog, which was great. And if you're not familiar with the previous catalog, it is a catalog that goes to all the retailers where they can flip through and put in their inventory orders for upcoming books. So once the first trade paperback was in the catalog, when the second trade paperback came out, volume 2, it was automatically enrolled into the catalog. So we had that as well, which was great. And yeah, I mean, that for a writer, it's very important to have something that's already made. People, as an artist, an editor can literally flip through your portfolio and know within 1 or 2 page turns if they want to hire you or not. As a writer, you have to make a book. So there is a financial burden to that. And I will completely and utterly not dispel any myths. There is a financial burden to that a writer has to take on. Is it fair? No. Does it suck? Yes. That is what it is. Andy Curry, who's an editor at DC Comics, had written a great Twitter thread. I think it was probably like a year or 2 ago, where he said, writers breaking in, it's tougher. Look, it's just something that you have to deal with. There are plenty of people that, and when I say breaking in, I mean getting licensed work, getting work for hire work. You can make your own comics, publish them on your site, publish them, you know, digitally all the live long day, and you're in comics. You've broken into comics. But if it's something that you want to do as a career and get licensed work and get work for hire work, then you have to have a body of work as a writer to show as a portfolio. So M3 became my portfolio. So after the first trade paperback came out, I had given it to a couple of editors. And about a year later, I was contacted by Marvel and ABC to write the graphic novel for the TV show Revenge that was on at the time on ABC. And so I was doing an original story that was a prequel to the first season. And that really opened up a lot of doors because the editors that I had given M3 to had read it and sort of, you know, kept it on their shelf. And when this opening came across their desk, it's, oh, okay, who do we know that can do this? Oh, remember that book M3? We can hire Erica. And that's really what it comes down to. And a lot of it is luck, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat that, but a lot of it is also perseverance. So if I had just sort of like done M3 and then never done anything ever again and never reached out to any editors and things like that, then I don't even know if I would have gotten that Revenge gig. But, you know, I was emailing editors and sending them the trade paperback and things like that, and, you know, getting your name out there. And I think that is important. And at the time, yes, you and I, we were both working for Blue Water at the time. And I had done a one-shot for them, I think. And then I was supposed to do that mini series that we talked about. Right. And unfortunately, I don't know if that publisher is even still around, but there were issues with payment and things like that. So we ended up not doing anything with the miniseries, which was a shame because I really enjoyed writing it, and I thought it was a lot of fun, and it was different from M3 in the sense that like M3 is very serious, whereas this was very campy, very comedic, and I saw it as a way of, you know, showing people that I'm not just sort of like a one-trick pony. But you know, it happened, and you move on.
So when you started getting professional work, and even with a place like Blue Water, did he see M3, or did he see scripts? So did you only show M3, or did you also show scripts?
I only showed M3. If you're talking about with Blue Water,
Yeah.
I had only shown M3. You don't show scripts to an editor unless they ask for them. Editors don't want to read scripts. They want to see finished work. And unless you are like really a top tier creator, editors want to see something that's finished. They don't want to see scripts. They don't want to worry about that. They want to see, maybe they'll ask to see an outline to, you know, get the basic gist of what you want to do for your story. But for the most part, they don't want to see your script until you're already hired for the job.
That's really interesting. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, so if you're trying to solicit work, sending a script isn't gonna help unless they specifically ask for that. But otherwise, if you are soliciting work as a writer, the best thing to do is to make a comic, and it can be you know, an 8-page comic. It can be a one-shot. It can be, you know, whatever you want it to be. But the point is that editors have to see that you can tell, you have a narrative thread, you have a narrative through line of your story, that your pacing is there. They also want to see that you can work with an artist, and they want to see follow through. And that's important. One of the biggest things is once you start getting more work, whether you're a writer or an artist, one of the biggest things is if you're on a monthly story, if you're on a monthly book, whether or not you can hit a monthly schedule. So if you can hit a monthly schedule, that's great. If your scripts are, you know, not perfect, but they're good, an editor can work with that. There is a lot of luck that comes into play. I do want to dispel one myth though. And I know people, there's sort of this acrimonious writer versus artist, you know, thing online. And I'm not addressing that. What I am addressing is this: not everybody is going to be a good writer. With art, it's more quantitative. You look at it and you're like, wow, this is bad art, or this is bad anatomy, or blah, 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 whatever. Whereas writing, you have to actually get into it to actually see whether or not it's good or bad. I think that there's a myth that because writing is seen as a form of communication, people think, well, I communicate every day, therefore I can write. All it's a matter of doing is taking the words that are coming out of my mouth and typing them into the computer. It's not that. It's so much more than that. And what I've noticed many, many times as I've been teaching classes, evening classes for the Hubert School, is that people say, oh, well, I've got this great idea that I've been working on for the past 15 years. I finally want to make it into a comic book. And then I look at what they've worked on, and there's no cohesiveness to the story. It's just a melange of vignettes. There's no connective tissue. There's no narrative thread. And what I've noticed is a lot of these people will come into my class and, you know, more or less not really want critique, but want endorsement. Like they want me to read their scripts as, you know, as an editor and say, this is fantastic. Take it, you know, send it to the artist immediately. And that's not what I do. And I am honest and I am harsh, but I am fair. And I'm not gonna, you know, I don't berate people, I don't belittle people. But if something's not working, I will tell you it's not working. I'm working now as an editor for Mad Cave Studios, and I've worked as an editor in the past, a project that you and I worked on together for Northwest Press called Rise, Comics Against Bullying. I was one of the editors on that. I was one of 4 founding editors on that story, on that project. And so, I mean, I had an editor on that. And you and I went back and forth on some things, and, you know, everybody needs an editor. And I think the main issue why everyone needs an editor is because as creators, we live with these ideas for a very long time. And we know all the answers are in our heads. But articulating the story is not always easy, whether you're articulating it in art or if you're writing a script for an artist, it's not always easy. So the first thing I always do whenever I get a script from, whether it's a student or anybody, I read and I write down my questions. And when I ask questions, the writer invariably says, oh, well, this, and starts spouting off the answer. Says, no, don't tell me the answer. Put it in the script. I shouldn't have questions. And sometimes, you know, people will be sort of taken aback by that. And, oh, well, you just don't understand the story. You're right, I don't understand the story because you're not telling me what I'm supposed to be understanding. Another thing is that when you're writing a script, there should be no surprises in it. Your audience for a script is not your audience for a finished comic. Your audience from a finished comic is a consumer, is a reader. Your audience for a script is an artist and an editor and a letterer and a colorist. They need to know everything. There's no twists, no gotcha moments in your script because you need to tell everyone what's going to happen. I liken it to going into a fun house and turning all the lights on. I need to be able to see that someone's going to jump out from around the corner as the editor. I need to know what's going to happen before it happens in the script, because if there's a continuity error or something like that, you know, there are certain ways to write a script. Writing a script is not writing a novel. Writing a script is not writing a screenplay. Writing a script, a comic script, is different. And I think far too many times people think, oh, well, I've written this or I've written that. I can totally write a comic script. How hard could it be? I've put people through their paces, and, you know, whether they appreciate it or not, I'm trying to make them a better writer. And I need an editor. Everybody needs an editor, because you get so myopic and you get so focused on how it's going to look and happen in your head that when you articulate it on the page, you are not telling everybody what is going to happen. And even if you are drawing your own script, even if you are writing your own story and drawing your own script, you still need to put it on the page. Because even in that exercise, there are sometimes you'll have an aha moment in that exercise of writing that script. So yeah, I've rambled, sorry.
No, that's okay. That was really interesting. And you know, it's funny. I had sent Erica a list of questions, and now it's like I'm going to just start making stuff up. So here's my gotcha moment for you. But so I have a question, because you've just given us a lot of really interesting information. And some of it is information that came out last week as well. And I think that's really interesting. But the thing that I have to ask you is, do you think you've learned more as a writer as an editor or as a teacher? Because some of the stuff you just said, I don't know if you would have gotten that stuff as just a writer. And I'm wondering exactly where some of that came from.
I think all three, as a writer, a teacher, and an editor, have all influenced how I write in general, because as an editor and a teacher, it exposes me to more voices and to different styles of voices. And then that can more or less enrich my own writing. One thing that there's a great editor named Steens. They and I actually, we edit together at Mad Cave Studios, and they had put together a great thread on Twitter about what it is to be a good editor. And the first tweet is "do no harm." And I joke and I say that I get the red pen out kind of thing. But the idea of being an editor is you're not there. As an editor, you should not be there to take over the story. As an editor, you should have a writer come to you with materials. And then you, as an editor, look and sort of sift through what's going to work out. And then say, okay, this is your ultimate vision. This is how we're going to make it happen, using the materials that you've brought and maybe adding some more. So it's kind of like going to the grocery store and not knowing what you're going to have for dinner. You buy a bunch of stuff, you come home and you say, what am I going to eat? And an editor more or less sort of takes stock of everything and says, okay, what is super important? You have to have your protein, you have to have your vegetables, you have to have this, whatever, and picks those things out and say, how are we going to make these all work together? And that's really what an editor does. And there are times that I've been so married to a story that when I really stopped and I started breaking it down, I realized that there's actually two stories there. There's this one story that really fits with everything, and there's a couple of things that fit together but don't fit with this, and take those and move those to another thing and then build it into its own thing. That actually is what happened with Forgotten Home. Forgotten Home was part of a story that I was working on, that when I really gave it a hard look, I realized that there were some of these little, nudgy things should be their own story, can carry themselves. And so I, chopped them out, left them on the cutting room floor, but then swept them up at another date and put them into their own sort of bin, and then forgotten, those were the seeds for what became Forgotten Home.
What was Forgotten Home? Tell us a little bit about that.
Forgotten Home is an 8-issue series on Comixology Originals. It is a story about a woman whose daughter is kidnapped. And we learn that Lorraine is not from around here. I won't call her an alien, but she's not from Earth. And she is a cop, and she had actually fled her homeworld, came to Earth, lived here for a long time, had a daughter, and sort of never really looked back. And her daughter and her daughter's best friend are kidnapped in sort of this rash of kidnappings that's happening in Montana, which is where the story takes place. And when Lorraine goes to investigate, she finds residual energy from her homeworld. So she has to go back home to rescue these kids. But going back home is a lot more complicated than you think, because she didn't just pack up and have a nice farewell. It was run away. And then you sort of show up 15 years later and you have to deal with the consequences, the tragic mess that you left in your wake. And so it's a lot about, it's about magic and family and, swords and sorcery kind of stuff. But it's also about friendship and relationships and, social structures and, where you fit in and sort of embracing where you fit in. So.
Um, and so you ended up splitting a lot of that out and making more stories out of what you had originally done.
Yeah, there was a story that I'm working on sort of on and off now that ended up being the real thing, because it basically started out as like the anti-Frozen. And I wanted a story about, you know, two sisters in a castle who hated each other kind of thing. And sort of the seeds of Forgotten Home were sort of mixed into that. And I really liked some of the ideas, but they just weren't gelling with this other sort of anti-Frozen story. So I took them out and I said, all right, I'm going to do something with this. Just got to put it over there. And then I finished the story that I was working on. And I said, all right, well, there's something there. It's sort of like a glint in the sand. What is it? And I looked at it and I started building on it and building on it. And that's where Forgotten Home came from. Basically for me, I write everything down. I think that would be a good rule of thought. I have notebooks with me all the time. I have a pen with me all the time. I have notebooks in my car, in my bag, everything, because I write everything down. Even the strangest thing you wouldn't think of can spark a great idea. And it might not be, you know, that one specific thing that you have to use as the, you know, the catalyst for the story. It can just inspire you to do something else. Case in point, I was reading a thread about education, about higher education, and there was a phrase that I wasn't familiar with. The phrase was the Red Queen, and I wasn't familiar with that. And that it's basically, I looked it up, and it has something to do with the, you know, two species more or less evolving, but sort of trying to outdo each other as they evolve for survival kind of thing. And I'm poorly explaining it, but just the phrase, the Red Queen, I was like, that's a really cool title. And I thought about, you know, well, there might be a story there, you know, this idea of, you know, battling factions for survival. And, you know, what is the Red Queen? Is the Red Queen a person? Is the Red Queen a place? Is the Red Queen a, you know, a disease? Maybe it's like some genetic thing, you know, and if you have the Red Queen, you're going to end up being, you know, the species that rules kind of thing. So, you know, just something as small as that got my brain, you know, moving. So I just, you know, jotted it down, and that goes in the notebook. And then when I have, you know, if I ever have a free moment to myself again, I sort of go through and I say, okay, look at these, you know, one-liners written on a piece of paper here and there. Is there anything here that is screaming, there's more?
That's really, really interesting. Okay, so I have a bunch of different questions, but and I want to go back to the comic shops and them three. But before I do that, so you mentioned that you're writing just like ideas that are coming around. When you choose to write a script, how do you do it? I mean, do you like go to a coffee shop like J.K. Rowling, or do you like sit at home, or do you listen to music, or what helps with that?
Well, it depends. If I'm writing my own work, I have a bit of a different process than if I'm writing a licensed work. Writing licensed work, they sort of give you the characters that you can work with, and then, you know, especially if it's something like Marvel, where it has to be in line with the continuity of like a specific timeline or whatever. And then you just start brainstorming about, okay, like, what can I do? What's interesting about this character? You know, is there a specific relationship between these characters and things like that? And just start sort of building out from there. If I'm doing my own stuff, you know, I can start with a character that sort of came to me, and work back from there, or I can start with a plot and start building characters in. What I usually do is once I have the sort of basic idea, the story, which is different than plot. Sort of a story is just, a very general thing, whereas plot is very specific. Like the story of Rocky is, a nobody from Philly works hard and, becomes a championship, at the top of his game in his field. Whereas the plot for Rocky is, Rocky Balboa works in a meat plant, all those specifics. And what makes that story Rocky is the relationships and the characters and such. So if I have a story idea, which is a very sort of general idea, whether it's, overcoming adversity or, that kind of thing, I will sit down and I will write a timeline, a chronological set of events. So what happened before the story picks up? What happens, what are the significant events that happened before the story? What are the significant events that happened during the story? And, if it's not at the end of the world, what happens? What's the aftermath of the story? So I give a little heads and tails. And then I sit down with that and I start thinking about, okay, of these events that occurred, what are so integral to the story that they have to be there? And I sort of flag those. If you're doing a post-apocalyptic story and the story starts after the war already happened, kind of thing, starts in the aftermath, you don't have to show the actual war, but you at least have to tell your audience, at least make inferences to the audience that this is what happened, whether it's through flashbacks or whatever. So once I have my timeline, then I start writing about the world. Is it something that takes place in this world? Is it something where gravity is the way it is, or is something different? And I start doing world building. And, what is it that makes this world different from our world? If there's not much about it, then I don't have to do much world building. Like with M3, I used to joke and say, I do, realistic stories because I don't want to have to worry about world building. Well, I sort of got away from that with Forgotten Home, because we build this whole world. And then after I do the world building, I outline the story, where I'll write the entire story arc on one page. And that the exercise for that is, if I want to fit it all on one page, I can't get too specific. I've got to be broad. And then what I'll do is I'll go through that page and say, okay, this is going to be issue 1, this is going to be issue 2, this is going to be issue 3. And then I take each one of those sort of groups of sentences, whether it's a full paragraph or not, and then I put that at the top of the page, and then I try and blow out the first issue as one whole page, and then the second issue, third, fourth. And then once I have that, I start doing breakdowns, and I say, okay, well, this sequence here is going to be 1 page, and this sequence here is going to be 2 pages. And then sort of I go macro to micro. And then once I have that, then scripting really is much easier, because I've already gone through all the steps and broken everything down. And it's just a matter of, okay, this page is going to have how many panels on it, and then adding dialogue. So I sort of, I guess I would say I front load a lot of the work, whereas I make sure that I have all my ducks in a row and I have the world built as I'm going to, and then start writing. But writing is an organic process, and sometimes things will happen along the way that you realize you want to add things or subtract things, and you have to find a way to do that in an organic way, whether that's through dialogue or through, a character dying off panel, or a character doing something off panel, or whatever. I know when Winter Soldier, when the movie Winter Soldier came out, there was a critique of it saying, well, if all this was happening, why didn't Captain America just call the Avengers? Because he had already been in the Avengers movie. And the directors and writer said, well, because everything happened in the course of about 3 days. So I have a story called 12 Devils Dancing that the entire story, I mean, there are a lot of flashbacks, but the entire present day story happens in about 6 days. 5.5, 6 days. So it is a very, very tight schedule. And we were with these two characters the whole time. And, you know, I tried to keep my outlines really, really tight. And I tried to keep, I tried not to let the story change too much because I was working in that tight timeline. But again, you know, things happen organically, and there's a couple of things that I had to, you know, find a way to push in. You never want anything to feel like it's been forced or shoehorned in. You want everything to sort of be as smooth as possible. But, you know, and sometimes when you're working on a licensed job, you know, something will happen and you'll get a call from an editor and they'll say, oh, you know, this big name creator is going to be working on something and they want to do this. So you can't do that in your script, but we'll find something else that's sort of going to fit the whole. So you really, like I said, you have to be very flexible. You have to be very, very malleable. And in terms of getting work, being flexible and being, you know, being able to pivot is a good thing. I'm not saying be a doormat, but be understanding of the fact that this is an organic process. I mean, I tend to be very type A. So like if I wrote it on the outline, that's what's going to happen. But I mean, if the characters are screaming at me from the page being like, this isn't right, then you got to listen.
Would you, okay, so would you classify yourself? You know, obviously you're writing, but one of the things that I found in the course of being forced to write for myself is that when I'm working on a story, I find that sometimes I'm more of an investigator in the sense of if something isn't working and something isn't tying something together, where is that thing? What's missing? Where is that thing? And how does it come in? And I say that because there was a scene in one of my books where something just wasn't making sense to me. And it's like, well, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And I came up with the idea of a pendant. And that pendant actually has carried over throughout the entire series and is something that's really important. But initially, it wasn't even there. It wasn't even thought of. And it's almost like I found that I had to find that thing that was missing. And so in that sense, it's almost like when you're working on a story, and I guess this is my question, do you find that you have to investigate these things? Like, why is this happening? And you have to come up with that reason or figure that out?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And I think that's where an editor helps a lot because you as a creator aren't always going to see the holes because you have the answers in your head. There's an experiment where you can actually read a sentence and there are words that are missing in the sentence, but they're words like the or a or on or something like that that are very, very common words that your brain just fills in. So when you're writing, that tends to happen. Your brain just fills it in, which is why I always suggest an editor, because an editor isn't going to have that fill-in brain. And as an editor, what they always say is the best way to edit a comic is to read it backwards. Because especially when you're coming down to like proofreading and, you know, commas and things like that, reading it backwards, because as the editor, once you get to that point, you know what's going to happen and your brain more or less just fills it in for you. But if you read it backwards, you're sort of interrupting that process and sort of forcing yourself to look at each balloon as you know, how it relates to this panel. And then after you read that whole page, you can then turn around and say, okay, how did this panel, you know, the last panel relate to the first and such. But yeah, I mean, that's, you know, a lot of that comes down to having a good editor, or bouncing ideas off of a co-writer, or even, you know, bouncing ideas off of your artist, and coming up with solutions together. As an editor, what I always do is, I always say, look, I will make suggestions. You don't have to take my suggestions, but you have to acknowledge that there's a problem. So if I see like a big plot hole, like something, you know, like this necklace or something like that, I'll make a suggestion like that. If somebody says, no, I don't like that. Okay, well then come up with something, because, you know, there's still an issue there. And depending on who it is that you're working with, whether you're the editor or you're the writer, a rapport is really important. You know, comics are, they're done in, even in the best of circumstances. Making comics is rough. It's rough on the artist, the writer, the colorist, the letterer, everybody, editor, everyone. And so having a good relationship is always really important, because you're working closely with these people. You know, how many emails a day you're going back and forth, you know, whether you're on a Slack channel or whatever, like, you know, how many times are you talking to this person a day, a week? You know, you want to be able, you don't want to be like, oh God, so-and-so emailed me again. You don't want that. And even if you're having a bad day and that's your initial reaction, that reaction is just going to fade immediately, because it's like, you know what, this is a project that I really enjoy working on. You know, I'll take that garbage attitude and sort of chuck it away for a second. So having a good relationship with an editor, with the rest of the team is very important. And that's why I always tell writers, when they are looking for an artist, to look for someone who has a shared vision of the story, and also someone who is, who you don't just think that their work is cool, you think that their work and their style will complement and elevate the story. So if you're an artist and you're looking to get work in comics, don't have a portfolio filled with pinups. You know, you have to show sequential storytelling. There are so many creators who have scripts up on their websites for free that you can download. If you don't have any sequential scripts, you don't have access to any scripts, go online. There are plenty of creators that give out scripts for artists to practice on. But you have to have sequentials in your portfolio. Unless you're going to be a cover artist, or you're soliciting work as a cover artist, still. And even still, I mean, you should still have some sequentials in general, because covers should be able to tell a story as well. I know I'm like all over the place, sorry.
No, that's okay. I think that it's really interesting. And I think that it's interesting, not just for me, but for anybody who's listening to it. And that's the point of doing this, is having people talk about stuff like this. And you know, the direction of the conversation is really the person who's doing the talking, and I don't mean me. And it's important to understand what's on someone's mind. Real quickly, I want to go back to when you were doing M3. Actually, there's a couple of different things I want to ask you. And the first thing I want to ask you, not with that, but first thing I want to ask you is, as a writer, what happens when you see the artwork that somebody did and you don't care for it?
Well, what I try to do is I try and work, if there is a scene or a page that is incredibly complex, that either I'm having difficulty articulating, or even at the best articulation, I think that it is sort of rife with confusion. What I will do sometimes is thumbnail it out. I mean, I worked as a background artist. Like I said, I'm serviceable, I'm not good. I will do sometimes just a thumbnail, and pretty much everything in my scripts, with the exception of if I'm doing work for hire work and there's something absolutely specific that a licensor wants, you know, that's one thing. But if I'm doing my own work, what I tell the artist always is, look, if I wrote 5 panels on a page and you need a 6th panel, then draw a 6th panel. And, you know, in the lettering pass, I'll redistribute the dialogue. If you can still communicate all this information in however many panels, as long as the information is communicated, that's it. You know, and I'll figure out how to move things around after. But usually, I mean, I'm very open when it comes to collaborating with artists, simply because I've done that before. I've done backgrounds, I've inked, I've done color assists, I've done animation. Like I've done it. I've done everything. So I basically, you know, make suggestions. But for the most part, if there's something that I do not care for, then the onus is on me to explain why. Because if I brought an artist into a project and there was something about that artist that made me bring them into the project in the first place. I did have a situation recently where I had a young artist. I reached out to a young artist about doing a pitch, and the work that they did, the work that they had on their site was really good. But it was very, very finished. It was very, very polished. And I had given them the pitch script, and the first red flag was that they couldn't hit any of the deadlines. And it was a combination of being nervous. It was a combination of, you know, wanting everything to be perfect and this, that, and the next thing. And it just basically came down to they weren't ready. They were young. They had a lot of raw talent. They had some talent in sequential storytelling, but they weren't ready. And they certainly weren't ready to be on a monthly schedule, because the super polished work that they have on their site took months of needling and noodling and going back and making changes and this and the next thing. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And please don't think that I'm sort of, denigrating this person, because they're very talented, but they're not ready. And one thing that an artist who wants to be in comics, who especially wants to be in, let's be honest, in big 2 comics, Marvel, DC comics, you need to be able to do good work day in, day out. And it is absolutely rough and it is tough, and I absolutely get it. But that is the job. Just like, to be a writer and to break in to getting license work, you got to put your money where your mouth is, and you got to, make a comic. Well, to be an artist, you got to be consistent. It's the same thing. And even to be a writer, you need to be consistent, There was an artist when I was first starting out who said to me, "You're never working on the job that you're working on. You're always working toward the next job." So you want to just continually elevate your work, and learn from your mistakes. And maybe you're working with a co-creator or an artist, and I'm speaking as a writer, but maybe you're working with an artist where things don't work out. Well, just get through the job. Do what you got to do. And then, thank you very much for your work. And then you don't have to work with them again, unless you get paired up again. But even at that, you can mention to your editor, well, so-and-so and I worked on this project together and it wasn't, a very pleasant experience. Is it possible to get another artist? And if not, then you know what? You at least know what to expect this time.
So do you usually see all of the artwork that comes through on your stories before it's published?
If it is my work and it's a creator-owned book, then yes.
Right. But that kind of wasn't what I was asking, because you have done stuff that hasn't been creator-owned.
Oh, well,
So
yeah,
for
that
example,
I do that as well, like the Marvel work and the DC
right,
work. Yeah,
right.
I do that as
So,
well.
so for
Because
example, before when I've worked on stuff, and when I was working on stuff for different companies, I would turn my work in, and then I wouldn't see it again until it was in print.
Mhm.
And there are a lot of instances in there where I took a look and I was like, oh my God, the inker screwed that up, or oh my God, the colorist screwed it up, or oh my God, the letterer, for God's sake, screwed it up. And so I was curious as to what, have you had that experience?
Yeah, I found continuity errors in artwork.
Okay.
Um, I usually will get the artwork as the writer to do a lettering pass where I've written all this dialogue in the script. Then I see the artwork and maybe I have to redistribute the dialogue differently. Maybe there's a better way to say something because I have a limited amount of space. Maybe there's a line that the licensor really wants to get in. So I have to find a space for, if there's like a catchphrase for a character, oh, the so-and-so really has to say that. Got to look at the art, see where it's going to fit. I don't always get to see colors, but I usually get to see line art. And by going through the line art as well, there are times that I will notice continuity errors. And I'll mention that and I'll just say, okay, just so, and you reach out to the editor and say, hey, just so you know, so-and-so is wearing a blazer in, page 3, panel 4, but in page 5, when we're supposed to be in the same spot, they're not wearing a blazer, they're just wearing a t-shirt. So is there a line that I'm going to then put in? Like if they can't change the art, is it a matter of, okay, well then I'm going to make a throwaway line like, oh man, I'm glad I took that blazer off. It was getting so hot in here, or something like that to cover that? Or is it a matter of, oh, we do have the time, we can go back to the artist and the artist can just, square off the shoulders and make it look more like a blazer rather than a t-shirt.
Gotcha. So, okay, so I want to go back in time a little bit. And I'm curious. So so we were talking about M3 earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that you started calling up the comic shops in New Jersey and in New York to see if they would carry the book. What kind of reception was that? Did a lot of people say yes? Did some people say yes? And,
well,
and what was the selling like?
Well, the floppies, there wasn't much reception when it came to the floppies because the floppies were not in they were not in previews.
Mm-hmm.
So it was difficult because the only way that they were going to be able to get the books were through me. Mm-hmm. There were a couple of shops that were like, oh, okay, we'll order like 1 or 2 copies. Because again, I was a brand new writer. Nobody knew who I was. They didn't know what the property was or anything like that. So they're not going to order 15 copies, obviously. I mean, it was a very sort of small reception, but once the trade paperback came out and it was in previews, then obviously it hit a much wider audience. And again, I had reached out to stores and things like that. One thing that people tend to do when they have a new book coming out that is in previews, and I mean, this is an example right here. I'm working on a book for Red 5 called Legacy of Mandrake. So what we did was it's in previews. So we made postcards with the cover art. And then at the bottom, it has the previews number, and it's just a postcard. You write the name of the comic shop, slap on a stamp and send it out, So we did a bunch of those for Legacy of Mandrake.
Who do you send those to?
Comic shops.
Oh, gotcha. Sorry.
Yeah. So we did that for 12 Devils Dancing when it came out from Action Lab. We had a postcard very similar to this with the cover artwork on it, and just hey, how's it going? This is the new book. This is the quick summary of the book. It's this genre. It's YA. It's this. It's that. Here's the order code. We hope you order it. Have a nice day, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Because previews, if anybody's ever seen it, the book is 4 inches thick practically. So 99% of these comic shops are going to go straight for the Marvel DC stuff or the big property stuff like Transformers or something like that. They might not know about smaller stuff. And unless a customer comes in and asks specifically for something, then they're not always going to be aware of it. Or unless they follow a particular creator online and see it, then they might not be aware of it. So just sending somebody, a postcard just saying, hey, give this a look. Then they can say, okay, let me look this up, whereas they might not go to the Red 5 page, the Red 5 section. Now, maybe they're like, oh, let me check this out. This looks kind of cool. And in the previews, they'll have a little more information about it. And then they can say, oh, I've got a couple of customers that I think would really this would appeal to. Let me put in an order for 5 books or, 4 books or whatever. And it really is, it's catching, drops in a bucket. It's little by little. And you sort of have to build a name, especially with indie work, you sort of have to build a name for yourself. And there are some shops that I know the shop owners and I've hung out with them and everything, and they'll order stuff, whatever I'm doing, just because they want to support me, and that's great. But also because they know that their clientele, for lack of a better term, the customers that come into the shop are interested in that kind of stuff. So, Legacy of Mandrake is a YA book. YA books are really big right now. Pretty much every shop out there has some type of YA book in them. Or if you get a new person coming in and saying, hey, I've got a niece who's around 13, 14, and she kind of wants to get into comics, but she doesn't know what she wants, this is something that would appeal to that. So, sending out postcards, I mean, you can get like 500 postcards for $80, made, and then you just have to buy the stamps for it. Now, mind you, postcard stamps are actually cheaper than regular stamps. Postcard stamps, I think, are 35 cents or 38 cents, whereas regular stamps are 55. So if you go to the post office and you buy postcard stamps, it's actually cheaper. But yeah, and there are places online where you can find a list of comic shops, and just, spend a day printing them out on sticky paper, slapping them on and slapping a stamp on. And, if you have a blue mailbox in your neighborhood, throw them in there, or take them to the post office and you would be surprised how many people have reached out and said, oh, hey, I didn't know this book was coming out. Would you like to come and do a signing at the shop? Or, hey, a lot of shops actually have like podcasts and things like that. So, they'd reach out and say, hey, I had no idea this book was coming out. You want to come on the podcast, or you want to do a signing, or, we're going to be having, do you want to come out for free comic book day? Or, some shops will have, like, if the shop has an anniversary, they'll have sort of like their own version of free comic book day for the anniversary. Do you want to come out for that? We're having a couple creators come out, and things like that. So it really, it gets your name into the minds of other people. And if people like the work and customers are buying it and they're suggesting, and the shop is suggesting it and people are buying it and they're liking it, then the next thing that comes out, maybe it's like, oh yeah, I recognize that name. Erica Schultz, she did the Legacy of Mandrake work and sold really well and everybody really liked it. What's the next thing she's doing? Oh, she's doing this thing. Oh, Forgotten Home. Huh, maybe we'll order that. The only sort of guaranteed sales is if you're doing like a Marvel or DC book. But it doesn't mean, first of all, everybody thinks that even if you do a Marvel or DC book, you're making millions of dollars in royalties, and that's absolutely false. So I'm just going to dispel that rumor right now. I can't get into specifics because of contracts and NDAs, but you have to sell a significant number before you start seeing royalties. Unless you are a top tier name with that in your contracts and you have, agents and such advocating for that, you have to sell a significant number of books before you start seeing any royalties. So the rumor that, anyone who has a blue badge next to their name on Twitter, is a millionaire or whatever, that garbage. Yeah. Sorry, have to dispel that rumor. But you know, if you're doing creator-owned work and you're getting it into shops, that's a big deal. Whether you're getting into shops through previews or you're mailing them a postcard like this saying, you know, I can send you a PDF preview if you like, and they reach out to you and you send them a PDF preview, and then they make an order directly through you. Either way, that's important because it's bringing you to a wider audience. And that's basically what you want. You want a wider audience. You want people at shops, and you know, I'm on the East Coast. You want people in shops on the West Coast, people in shops in Canada. You want other people to know about your work and to then say, go to their comic shop and say, hey, so-and-so just announced on Twitter or Facebook that they're going to be doing a new book. Can I pre-order it? Because a lot of people don't realize that when you are doing comics and they're going into stores, you have to pre-order a book ahead of time. So if you have an indie book and the day the book comes out in the stores, people come running for it, and the stores won't have it because you didn't pre-order it. And that's kind of that's a flaw in the direct market, I think, which is why a lot of times you will see creators really pushing on social media, hey, go to your comic shop, pre-order this book, because it's not going to be in the shops on the day it comes out if you don't pre-order it. And it's frustrating to some customers, and I get that, because it's like sight unseen. At the same time, if you enjoy a creator, take that chance, because 9 times out of 10, they're creating more stuff that you're going to enjoy.
I have one more question, and then I should probably wrap this up because my cat is circling me wanting to be fed.
And I'm going to be, my stomach is circling me wanting to be fed.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean
to. No, it's okay. It's okay.
So tell me real quick about your, you've sold at shops, but you're one of the first people that I knew who did this, which is one of the reasons why I'm asking the question. You're one of the first people who went out and started going to conventions. And so I'm curious about your take on that and your experience. And part of that is I'm exclusively at conventions. I actually have sidestepped the comic shops for various reasons, but where my stuff is conventions, and then free comic book day at comic shops and stuff like that. But conventions have been are a very important part of my life. And I'm curious as to what your experience has been, and have you found that you've made a lot of really good connections when you go to those conventions?
I do think conventions are important because comic retailers do go to conventions. And they go to conventions because they're fans. And if you have a book that is not in previews and a retailer comes by and wants to talk to you about it, then they might really like the book and place an order for like 5-6 copies, which I know that does not sound like a lot. But when you go to a convention and you don't sell any books all weekend, and then someone comes up and says, I'm going to buy 5 copies for my shop, here's my card, let me get your information, because if people really like it and we sell out of these 5-6 copies, then we're going to come back for issue 2 and issue 3 and whatever. Conventions are important in the sense that also, like we talked about, getting your name recognition and getting your work known in a different environment. You know, I do a lot of conventions in New Jersey just because it's convenient. You can drive to them and things like that. The other thing, though, is that some conventions can be incredibly expensive. And people don't understand the budgetary dynamics of that. If you go to a convention and you paid $100 for your table and you sell $50 worth of merchandise, then you're in the hole still. You know, you're not like, woo, I made $50. No, you really didn't. This is actually one of the things that we talk about at the Kubert School in one of the business classes when we're talking about sort of like, you know, okay, we're doing math today, but, you know, some conventions can be expensive. New York Comic Con is a huge convention. well, there's no NDA for this. So, you know, when I cross the threshold on the first day of New York Comic Con, which is, it's a 4-day show, I'm already $600 in the hole, because it's $500 for the table, and then gas and tolls getting in, parking, and things like that. And if I ever, and if I ordered a special banner for the show, or if I ordered special postcards or something like that, or if I had a special show print made up or something like that, all of that adds up. So that means that no matter what, in order to break even, I automatically have to make $600. And then, yes, it's a 4-day show, so the likelihood of doing that is a lot greater. But with every single day, the expenses keep mounting because you got to eat. Maybe you get a bottle of water. You know, maybe you end up going out to coffee. You end up meeting an editor and they want to meet for coffee, all of those things. So conventions are expensive. I'm not going to say that they're absolutely critical, but they are important. I'm going to say networking is important. Instead of saying conventions is important, networking is important. Following creators, asking creators advice. I know Gail Simone has her comic book school, hashtag comic book school, that she did, which was great. You know, there are a lot of creators that you can go to their websites and ask them questions. They may get back to you, they may not. Some people are really, really busy, but 9 times out of 10, they'll say, first of all, don't send a creator your script. That's the first thing. So let me just put that out there. Don't find a creator on Facebook or Twitter and find their email address and then email them a script. That is a big no-no. Because as a creator, you cannot read somebody's script, because if you read somebody's script unsolicited and 5 years later or 6 years later, you do a story that in some way is even slightly close to the script that you read, then that's just a really ugly situation to be in. Don't send editors unsolicited scripts. An editor will ask you for a script. If they ask you, then you send it, but don't send unsolicited pitches to editors or whatever. If you are going to submit a story for a publisher, go through their submission guidelines and things like that. That you can do unsolicited because they have an open submit. A lot of publishers have open submissions. But if you see an editor on Twitter or Facebook and they follow you back or they join your friend group or whatever, do not immediately start bombarding them with direct messages or private messages, read my script, whatever. Do not do that. And don't send scripts to creators. If you reach out to a creator and say, I want to hire you as a consultant, or I want to hire you as an editor, that's different, because you are telling them, I'm hiring you to edit my work, and then a contract will be involved and such. But you see it a lot. You see people saying, I cannot read unsolicited manuscripts. So please do not do it. Because what happens is it puts the creator in a really bad position to say no to somebody. And then a lot of times people don't like hearing no. And then things can get acrimonious, and then someone gets on Twitter and starts saying what a horrible person this creator is. And, you know, and nobody needs that garbage. But following creators on social media, looking at their Patreons, supporting their work. A lot of creators have Patreons or Ko-Fi, or I think, sorry, Ko-Fi, it's K-O-F-I, you know, that kind of thing. Supporting their work, talking to them, you know, when creators do AMAs, asking them questions. These are all the things that you can do to start getting more information. Scott Dunbier writes a bunch of books about making comics and such. Going to conventions, talking to other indie creators, you know, finding out what their experiences are. That's important. I do have to say this, though. No one is entitled to a creator's time. So if someone reaches out to me and says, I want you to read the script, or I want to do this, and I say, I can't get to it, and then I get another email the next day. Don't do that. Don't do that to me. Don't do that to anybody. The other thing that I'm going to say, and then I'm going to run away after I say this, I'm going to drop the mic and run, is no one is entitled to a creator's work. I've gotten into arguments online with people about piracy, and you're not entitled to their work. You know, you don't want to do your job for free. Don't expect a creator to do their job for free. It's actually one of my rules at the Kubert schools. If I find out that you're pirating media, you get an automatic fail for the semester. No questions asked. It's not cool. It is not justified. I don't care how you justify it. It's not justified. Sorry. That's a hill I'll die on.
Okay. All right. So we're going to wrap this up. A couple of things real quick. When I had introduced you, I didn't mention that you were working at the Kubert School. And I'm wondering if you want to tell people what you are working on, what you're doing, and where they can find you.
Well, yes, I am working at the Kubert School. I'm a writing instructor. I teach writing and I teach story adaptation. Those are the two classes that I teach. I am currently working on The Legacy of Mandrake, which final order cutoff date is August 27th. So if you want to order Legacy of Mandrake, it's a great new YA. It's a YA story that reboots and sort of encompasses the old original Mandrake the Magician comic. So that will, you know, tell your local comic shop that you want to pick that up. I am editing for Mad Cave Studios. Unfortunately, I cannot reveal the team or the book that I'm editing for them soon though. Forgotten Home is out from Comixology Originals. All 8 issues are out and collected, a beautiful Bill Sienkiewicz cover. I have, you can find me on social media. I am Erica Schultz 42, SCHULTZ 42. On Twitter, I'm Erica Schultz Writes, WRITES on Instagram. I also have my website is ericaschultzwrites.com, and all my work can be purchased on the store through my site. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Scott. And thank you everyone for watching. And I'm going to bring this live stream to an end. Thanks so much.